young men. Do you believe it's okay for them to go overseas and take up arms against American interests?
If, in the case where America is fighting our Muslim brothers and sisters in different countries, and individuals decide to leave and go there and to fight against the American soldiers, that's their call, right?
A lot of people hearing that, especially back in the United States, would find that a detestable comment. They wouldn't be okay with any of what you just said.
So does the American people, the American government wish that when they go into a country and invade a country and starts fighting the people there, the people should just lay down and, kneel before them and surrender? That's what they expect that's going to happen? That's not going to happen. Let us be real. People are going to fight back.
And doing so in alarming numbers. According to multiple reports, 135 Trinidadians have made their way to the Middle East. They've been documented taking up arms against Americans and even dying in the fight. One of the first was Shane Crawford. The 28-year-old joined ISIS in Syria, where the terror group used him in propaganda videos because of his English and his origin, even featuring his Trinidadian home in their online recruiting magazine. Imam Moreland Lynch says he knows half a dozen men like Shane who have since joined ISIS overseas.
He was quiet, but you never know a man quiet what they're planning and what they're thinking and who giving them the school of thought, who is teaching them and who is training them.
Lynch preaches a different message, one of peace. He is critical of ISIS and its followers on the island. One of them, he says, retaliated, shooting and killing his 22-year-old son, Akmal. That was 3 years ago. The problem, he says, has only grown. Some people have reported 135 Trinidadians have left and gone overseas as foreign fighters. Do you think that number is high, low, accurate?
I feel more than that.
You feel it's more than 135?
Yeah, I feel more than that.
Because the Attorney General and the government seems to think it's a relatively low number.
No, it's huge. I don't know where he gets any estimate from. It's huge.
That, of course, is on a population bed of 1.4 million citizens, but sometimes statistics don't really let you know the phenomenon. You can say 100% of a teacup, or you can say 100% of the ocean. While Trinidad's Attorney General, Faris Al-Rawi, downplays the numbers, he doesn't trivialize the threat. And under his watch, the government has passed stricter new anti-terrorism laws and frozen the assets of 356 individuals and entities. I can tell you that we have put it on steroids. We've really ramped up the production. I think we're headed in the right direction. Terrorism mutates. You must be always nimble and always prepared. We will not stick our heads into the sand and pretend that the phenomenon is one that can avoid us simply because we're a beautiful people and wonderful Caribbean island. The danger isn't just abroad. This February, Trinidad's law enforcement, with U.S. support, thwarted a plot to attack the island's biggest annual festival, its Carnival. The American embassy was also a target. Police and security specialist Paul Narhus has long been monitoring the spread and actions of ISIS sympathizers here. He claims they're gearing up.
And what I've noticed or I've observed in Trinidad is that the gangs now are starting to look less like gangs and more like terrorist cells or insurgent cells, because the type of weapons they have, the amount of ammunition they have stockpiled. They've been finding grenades all around. They've been finding AK-47 rounds. AR-15 is the new pistol now. To them, they all have, all gangs have a stockpile of automatic weapons. So the street violence now is beginning to resemble insurgency.
Does the government have a grip on what's happening here?
No, not at all. The government does not have a grip. The police service does not have a grip.
Just how severe the problem is and how prevalent recruitment may be differs depending on who you ask. But one consensus among many people we talk to is that more U.S. involvement would be welcome. Earlier this year, the U.S. military's Southern Command, which helps oversee threats in the Caribbean, held a joint exercise with Trinidad's forces to prepare for terror incidents.
Can we happily say that we'd accept more? We're always willing to accept more from our international friends.
Those solutions here seem outnumbered by the challenges. Despite the island's lucrative oil reserves, wealth isn't well spread. Unemployment is high, street crime too. And the tiny Muslim population, just about 5%, feels shut out. One gang even named itself Unruly ISIS. Online sermons from terror groups thousands of miles away still prove persuasive here.
I'm fearful when that time comes. The government, who is already showing indications that they're unable to address the issue of crime, petty crime, they'll be able to address this issue.
Talk to me about that anti-American sentiment.
There are those who don't sympathize with terrorist cells, but at the same time have an anti-American sentiment, an anti-Israeli sentiment. And, because we see what's going on in the world, we see certain injustices done by first world nations.
And that's what's driving some of this recruitment?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's two sides of the same coin. They have that sentiment, an anti-Western sentiment, and then they have a lack of real knowledge in terms of the Middle East, in terms of what goes on there, in terms of culture there. So what they know is what they read, what they see on TV. So they use that to formulate their opinions. And I find in this nation that people are very hardened by their opinions.
An opinion both posing a threat to U.S. soldiers overseas and formulating not far from American shores. Though Joseph Mondello is due to take up his post next week, he has stated radicalization and ISIS recruitment of Trinidadians is the most important issue he'll face. At a point in the recent hearings for Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, we look at abuse allegations against Democratic leader Keith Ellison campaigning to be a state attorney general, the question of equal standards and justice ahead. Hill hearings of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh may have been the biggest flashpoint of the Me Too movement to date. The hearings raised the question of standards in the Me Too era. Are women to be believed solely based on an unproven allegation? If corroboration is required, then what's good enough? And who gets to decide? Those are some of the tricky questions raised by abuse allegations made against a top Democrat official, Congressman Keith Ellison, by an ex-girlfriend who spoke to Cheryl this week.
Karen Monahan, a Sierra Club organizer born in Iran, had a long-term but rocky romantic relationship with Congressman Keith Ellison.
I met Keith Ellison when I was doing community organizing work.
Monahan now claims Ellison, the #2 official in the National Democratic Party, subjected her to long-term psychological abuse and one instance of physical abuse.
And I'm going to ask this question at the beginning because I know in this environment a lot of people are going to want to know, are you a Democrat or Republican or something else?
All my life, I have voted Democrat.
Monahan was home lying on the bed in August 2016, she says, when an argument started before Ellison left on a trip.
He walked in, he asked me to take out the trash. I shook my head yes, but I kept looking down at my phone.
She claims she managed to video some of what happened next on her phone. We only know because her adult son told about the video on social media, but she's declined to show us or anyone else, saying it's traumatizing and embarrassing.
I just wanted him to leave, and when I didn't look up at him and I shook my head, that's when he said, "Hey, I'm talking to you. You need to listen." And I was stunned, and that's when he grabbed my ankles and said, "You need to get the out. You need to get the out now." And he started grabbing my ankles, trying to pull me off the bed, told me I was a bad guest.
You were a guest in his house?
I lived there.
What happened after that?
He kept trying to pull me. I put my body weight. He didn't pull me off the bed. He was trying to drag me off the bed. And then he looked down, I guess, and knocked my flip-flop off I had flip-flop house shoes on, knocked it off my foot, and told me I better be the out of his house.
Monahan claims that capped off years of psychological abuse. Afterward, they patched things up off and on until they broke up for good in January 2017. That's when Monahan became an advocate, frequently speaking of domestic abuse on social media, but never mentioning Ellison by name. 4 months after the breakup, Ellison sent a threatening text message. Andrew Parker is Monahan's attorney.
And I'll quote, Mr. Ellison says in the text, "Karen, I cannot allow you to publish material about me. You may not publish material about our relationship, Karen. I mean it. Please don't make me prove to you that I am serious."
Ellison would later tell investigators he was only threatening legal action, nothing more. The two kept in touch. He said he missed her. She frequently texted of her need to heal, his supposed need to get help, and she twice texted about the alleged physical abuse.
And then, Keith, we never discussed the video I have of you trying to drag me off the bed, yelling, "Get the f*** out now," calling me a bitch and saying, "I hate you, bitch."
Last June, the night before Ellison announced he was running for Minnesota Attorney General, he and Monahan met up at her request.
And he asked me about that. You know, I don't want to look over my shoulder and wonder, you know, basically when you're going to, you know, say it was me. And I mentioned the abuse during that meeting, and he looked at me. He goes, "Oh, I don't remember it being that way." And I looked at him, I said, "And that's a problem."
Emboldened by the Me Too movement, Monahan says she soon did reveal it was Ellison who'd allegedly abused her. But instead of being believed, she was viciously attacked and called a liar. No advocacy groups reached out. No prominent Democrats came to her defense.
I shared my story, my vulnerability. I've shared intimate text, and I'm still getting smeared, still getting bullied, still victim shamed.
While Monahan fended off critics, out of the blue came the 36-year-old allegation against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh.
He began running his hands over my body and grinding into me.
Monahan says the support that important people in her political party gave to Christine Ford compared to her led her to ask, are women to be believed except when they accuse certain powerful Democrats? The Minnesota Democratic Party launched an investigation into Monahan's allegation, limited to the single claim of physical abuse. Though he wouldn't speak with us, Ellison firmly denied it to investigators and in a local news interview.
Because I never did that. It simply didn't happen.
Monahan turned over to investigators medical records from nearly a year ago showing she'd reported emotional and physical abuse by Congressman Ellison. 3 witnesses testified Monahan described the alleged physical attack to them in the months after it happened, telling one she was scared of Mr. Ellison.
It certainly is far more evidence than Dr. Ford had in the Kavanaugh case.
But it wasn't enough. A week and a half ago, the Minnesota Democrats' investigation found both Monahan and Ellison were credible. An allegation standing alone is not necessarily sufficient to conclude that conduct occurred. Conclusion: physical abuse could not be substantiated. In short, Democrat officials said Ford's claim alone was enough to believe her, but rejected Monahan's even though it was backed by witnesses and medical records.
The same people that are questioning Ms. Monahan, the people who say they stand up and support women against abuse and violence, they're silent. Many others are not just silent, but are smearing and attacking Ms. Monahan, even though she is just telling her story.
We hear the slogan, "Women are to be believed," and yet you haven't been the recipient of that benefit of the doubt by some people. What does that say to you?
I have one side talking about anti-Muslim rhetoric. I have the other side totally disregarding that I'm a woman of color. I come from a Muslim country. I am an immigrant. They're saying mine's not a Me Too story. Basically, they're saying you're invisible here, 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 here. I'm not invisible, and I'm taking up space.
Monahan told Cheryl that she's never had any interest in filing a criminal complaint, that her motivations are rooted in healing. She told investigators she does not believe her allegations against Mr. Ellison disqualify him from being Attorney General, and she, quote, is okay with him winning. Coming up on Full Measure, unless you're one of the...
No new mines until the city could do more research.
We don't necessarily object to somebody buying our electricity, but we view it as a fixed resource. We only have a certain amount to sell, and we'd like to generate as much bang for the buck as we possibly can for our community.
Communities around the world are navigating the cryptocurrency surge. Washington state saw a mining boom until last spring, when a key county also imposed a moratorium on new mines after reviewing their impact on utility operations. China's government has begun shutting down some of its massive mines, citing electricity use as one of the reasons. But where there are mines, there is money. In the tiny former Soviet state of Georgia, one American-based company, Bitfury, reportedly generated more than $90 million in revenue last year.
The whole world infrastructure is changing because of this. It is so narrow-minded to just look at Bitcoin at this point, because once you get under the hood and you realize what's going on, it's revolutionizing the whole world.
So, Josie, when a moratorium goes into place, then what?
Well, this is an industry that is entirely mobile. All they want is cheap power. So if they get a moratorium or if they get kicked out some other way, it's just on to the next.
All right, interesting. Thank you, Josie. Ahead, a look at what's coming up next week on Full Measure. They're in public salaries, but some are millionaires. And even as the country is falling further into debt, several members keep getting richer.
From 2004 to 2016, the median net worth of Congress has grown from $619,000 to $1.2 million.
And how does that compare to ordinary Americans?
Average Americans have seen their median net worth stay about the same, sitting at about $90,000.
We follow the money to see who's getting it. Cheryl sits down with a Republican and a Democrat next week on Full Measure.